The Mini Evo Cinema is the newest camera from Instax, and following on from the Wide Evo is their latest venture into a more premium product that aims to bridge the gap between Fujifilm's X series and Instax cameras. I spent a few days with the camera to get a feel for it and to test out its main selling points, its ERAS dial and ability to shoot short form video. So in this video, I'm going to discuss the camera's specs, the variety of effects you can add using its ERAS dial, and whether it's worth the more premium price point at $329.99. So let's get into it. I want to start by talking about the camera's design, as it's one of the most unique designs seen on an Instax camera so far. In a nod to one of its key selling points being its ability to shoot video, the Mini Evo Cinema takes clear inspiration from Super 8 style cameras in its design, specifically the Fujica Single 8, and includes a detachable viewfinder that can cover the 170,000 dot LCD screen should you choose. This brings me on to my first point about the Evo Cinema. This is clearly a camera aimed at photography and video enthusiasts who would recognise the inspiration taken from a classic camera design, rather than the usual casual customer Instax caters for. But is that ambition matched by the camera's specs? At 5 megapixels, the Evo Cinema does feel like a bit of a step down from the Wide Evo's 16 megapixels. Granted, it is a smaller image being the portrait-sized mini format, but for a premium camera, it would have been nice to see the Wide Evo's step up in quality carried over, especially considering the Mini Evo Cinema is £10 more expensive. The camera records video at 600 by 800, which leans into its main gimmick being the ERAS dial. When you're trying to replicate video from the 1930s or 1940s, you're not expecting HD quality footage. It does also have a high quality video mode at 1080 by 1440, but this is only available with the ERAS dial switched to 2020. My honest thoughts on the camera's video recording option are that I'm just not sure who it's for. As I said, there's a clear influence from Super 8 style cameras, which will appeal to enthusiasts, but the video being short form and portrait oriented is something I'd associate with TikTok or Instagram Reels, and I don't see this camera being used to create content for those platforms. The camera's internal memory will allow you to store approximately 50 shots or 10 video clips. As with any of Instax's digital options, I'd highly recommend using a micro SD card, massively expanding its storage, giving you 800 shots per gigabyte or 162 video clips per gigabyte. The Evo Cinema has a fixed lens, which is the 35mm equivalent of 28mm, with an aperture of f2 and shooting distance of 10cm to infinity. The shutter speed ranges from 1/4 to 1/8000th of a second, which switches automatically, and the ISO ranges from 100 to 1600, which also switches automatically. The Evo Cinema has the option for exposure control ranging from -2 to +2, and a lot of the time I was shooting at around +1, especially on the older eras that shoot in black and white. These are standard for any of Instax's digital offerings at this point, but the camera does have options for auto, suppressed or forced flash, along with a self-timer at 2 or 10 seconds, which works nicely with the camera's tripod mount. So onto the camera's main selling point, its ERAS dial. This has 10 different options starting at 1930 all the way up to 2020, with each option adding a different effect to replicate the look of video from the time. For this section, I will be showing the digital file for the photos rather than a scan of a printed copy, so bear in mind that these photos are intended to be viewed in a much smaller format. For any of the camera's ERAS dials, you can also change the intensity of the filter using the lens ring. The frame switch allows you to turn a different frame effect on or off for each era, such as the 1990s home video style date stamp. The 1930 filter is of course black and white, extremely grainy with dust and scratches, with the optional frame being a crosshair. This was one of the eras where I mostly had the exposure up by 1 due to the extremely deep shadows, though these can also create some really cool moody shots. This era can be extremely blurry, so if you want your shots fully in focus, I'd recommend turning the intensity dial right down. The 1940s filter actually ended up being one of my favourites to use, and one of the more unique eras on the Evo Cinema. With a free colour inspired look that creates vibrant pinks and greens on top of black and white, the shots taken in the 1940s era really pop. Similar to 1930, the 1940 filter has a crosshair as the optional frame. 1950 takes clear inspiration from TV sets of the time, with its rounded vignette on the optional frame and heavy flickering. This was another one where I was adjusting the exposure to around 1 due to the heavy shadows, but also the best filter for creating moody, surreal shots. 1960 starts to add a bit more colour and everything becomes a little bit more in focus. I couldn't seem to find any explanation of what the inspiration is for the optional frame on this one, but the general theme seems to be inspired by early home movies. This was one of the eras I used the least when testing, as nothing really stands out about it. 1970 was another of my favourite eras to use, being the most vibrant up to this point, with its green and blues being especially highlighted. Similar to 1950, it takes inspiration from TVs of the time, with its optional frame having a rounded edge and some flicker effects added. 1980 brings the vibrance down a little, but has a bit more clarity in its shots, clearly inspired by home videos of the time, with the optional frame adding a date stamp. The 80s era adds a nice amount of grain, making its shots reminiscent of film photography from the time. Similar to 1980, the 90s era takes clear inspiration from 90s home videos, with the optional frame adding date and information stamps to create that 90s nostalgia. The colours are somewhat muted, but some shots do have this nice purple tint to them. The 2000 era ended up being another favourite to experiment with, mostly due to its very vibrant colours and heavy contrast, which really makes the shots pop. This one takes inspiration from 2000s Digicam style cameras, which is reflected in its optional frame. I know there's a lot of nostalgia these days for this style of camera, so I'd imagine this era will be pretty popular. 2010 ended up being one of the eras I used the least, mostly because the shots just weren't very interesting to look at. The optional frame takes inspiration from YouTube, but the actual look of the shots reminds me of early mobile phone cameras, which honestly I don't think are something people have much nostalgia for. Finally, 2020. Not really a lot to say about this one, as it's the default way to shoot and essentially the same shots you'd get from shooting on Instax's other digital mini cameras. The optional frame adds grid lines, which works fine for framing your shots, but not as a feature of them. My final thoughts on the Evo Cinema are that it's an exciting new addition to the Instax lineup, but one that's mainly going to appeal to only the biggest Instax fans. Similar to the X-Half, this is one I'd be more likely to pick up if it drops a bit in price. However, it is nice to see Instax continue to put out more experimental products, and I am excited to see what comes next. So thank you so much for watching. If you did enjoy this video, please give it a like, please subscribe, go and check out some of my other videos. Also go and give me a follow over on Instagram where I post all of my shots. Again, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.